What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Magicka Templar. So the Magicka Templar got a surprise buff in Wrathstone through the use of their skill Solar Barrage. Initially in Murkmire, Solar Barrage only granted empowered whenever it ticks, so basically it only granted 4 empowered ticks. Now in Wrathstone, it grants empowered ticks as long as it is active, so it'll give you the full 8 seconds. You pretty much have empowered ticks that entire time. So it basically grants you twice as many empowered ticks as before, which makes it quite a powerful move to use, regardless of whether you're in melee range or in ranged distance away from the boss. So Solar Barrage, that buff to that move pretty much increased Magicka DPS by a noticeable margin, making it very competitive with Magicka Nightblades when it comes to potential DPS ceiling. Now, the one downside of this, if you want to compare it to the Magicka Nightblade, is the fact that Magicka Templars are reliant on your healer for that Minor Berserk from Comet Prayer. So if your healers are not very good at maintaining Minor Berserk on you, then you are going to end up losing out to the Magicka Nightblades. Magicka Nightblades, as you guys might remember, do have Minor Berserk built into their tool sets, in their skills. So naturally, they have more consistent uptime with Minor Berserk, so they will have a more consistent high DPS parse, even though Magpies might be able to break through that ceiling there. But all that said and done, Magpies are still a very powerful class nonetheless. They're very, very strong. They're probably, again, competitive with the top spot, only matched by Nightblades. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, attributes, skills, CPs, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. I will be going over a couple of gear substitutions that you might want to make depending on whether you have access to these sets or not. All set substitutions are noted down in the description below. We will be talking about our rotation, especially now that we're using Solar Barrage, and then we'll finish things off with the 6-1 dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the DPS that you can expect to pull using a Magicka Templar. So, starting things off here first, we'll be talking about our gear. The gear is pretty much unchanged compared to Murkmire. There are really no sets that were introduced in Wrathstone. None of the dungeon sets and none of the updated Cyrodiil sets have made their way into the Magicka DPS meta. So, at this point, it's pretty much just exactly the same as it was in Murkmire. So, our monster helm set is Zaan, so we have heavy medium. We're going 5-1-1 here, and then we have Perfect Siroria here as our body set. I'm using Perfect here. You can use the imperfect version. The Perfect does drop from Cloud Rest +1, Vet Cloud Rest +1 and above, so if you aren't able to clear that just yet, you can go with the imperfect version. The only difference is that max Magicka bonus you get from that 5-piece there. So Siroria is a very strong set, even in mobile fights, as long as you're kind of aware of your Siroria stacks and you're trying to maintain them. You can get pretty decent uptimes on that Siroria stacks, which will end up out DPSing some other more popular sets out there, more common sets. But again, you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to get this set, and I will be going over a couple of substitutions that you might make in place of Siroria here. Now, similarly for the Monster Helm set, Zaan does have a couple of limitations. The first one is obviously you have to be within 8 meters for it to proc, so if you have to play at range, if you're outside that 8 meters, Zaan is basically completely useless for you. The other thing too is that Zaan does require you to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC. It does come from Scalecaller Peak, which is a fairly difficult dungeon to complete. So you might not necessarily be able to access Zaan, and if you are playing at range, if you're playing further than 8 meters away, you won't be able to use Zaan at all. In those instances, you are going to want to run Skoria or Lambris. Skoria is typically going to DPS a little bit more than Lambris, assuming that you are running something like Flame Front Bar, Berserker, Enchant on the back bar. If you're running Flame on the front bar and Shock on the back bar, Lambris pulls just a little bit ahead of Skoria, but Skoria is at the very least going to be more consistent because it deals all of its damage in one hit, compared to Lambris, where if the boss is moving out of your Lambris proc, you basically are removing itself from the damage, so you do a little bit less DPS that way. So Skoria is going to be a little bit more consistent here if you are going to be playing at ranged. The other option, if you're going to be able to play at melee but you don't have Zaan, is going to be Grothar. Grothar will out DPS Skoria if you're able to be within that 8 meter radius of the Grothar proc itself, mainly because that 1-piece adds max Magicka and the 2-piece does deal more damage compared to Skoria. So Grothar and Skoria are your two base game sets that you can run. Grothar if you're able to play at melee, Skoria if you're going to be playing at ranged. Grothar is pretty easy to obtain. Vaults of Madness, very easy dungeon, and again, it is a base game set, so anybody can obtain this set here. For our front bar set, we are going with Spell Strategist. This is a PvP set, a rewards of the worthy set, so every 20,000 AP that you gain, regardless of whether that's through Cyrodiil or Battlegrounds, you get a rewards of the worthy coffer that has a chance of having a piece of Spell Strategist along with 5 other sets. So you will need to either buy this off of guild traders, or you'll need to PvP, whether that's Cyrodiil or Battlegrounds, for a chance to get your Spell Strategist jewelry and weapons. So we are using jewelry and weapons here. Spell Strategist is typically used as a front bar set here. For jewelry enchants, all bloodthirsty, all spell damage enchants. Now you can go with Infused if you would like. Infused is going to do a little bit more DPS than Arcane. Arcane is also not a bad choice if you want a little bit more sustain. Plus, it does give you a little bit more max Magicka, so it does, for Magicka Templars, it does boost the damage of your Jesus Beam, but overall, it's either going to be some combination of Bloodthirsty and Infused, depending on the specific trial that you are in. For armor traits and enchants, all Magicka, all Divines. You could go with Infused on the large pieces, but all Divines are going to be a little bit more flexible in terms of which Mundus you want to choose, because you really have 2 Mundus options here. You can either go with the Thief or the Shadow, and having 7 Divines just gives you a little bit more flexibility when you want to swap those 2 Munduses out. For our front bar, we have an Infused with the Flame damage enchant, and for our back bar, we have an Infused Maelstrom Inferno staff with the Shock damage enchant. The front bar is also an Inferno staff. Now, you could feasibly go with a Precise. After a certain DPS point, Precise does end up out DPSing Infused. However, that DPS point is actually very, very high. Based on a couple of raid parses that I have done with Mayflower, it seems like even though Precise does beat out Infused in certain scenarios, the difference is very, very minimal at best, and really you're only going to be seeing this difference if you're one of those very, very high-end players who's able to pull 70k raid buffed parses. So I would recommend just sticking with Infused Flame damage. That's probably going to be the most consistent DPS out of Precise versus Infused here. Now, in terms of your back bar enchant, you really have 3 options when it comes to which enchant you want. I have a shock damage enchant here, which will give you the most single target DPS. If you are in a position where you want more cleave damage, so for example, you're going through trash in VMA or something, or Halls of Fabrication, you're going to want to use a Berserker enchant instead, because that will end up boosting your AoE moves, so it gives you a little bit more cleave damage that way. Now, if you're not able to fully sustain a light attack rotation, you might need to use an Absorb Magicka enchant instead. That just gives you a little bit more sustain that way. So really, you have 3 enchant options. Shock for single target and you're able to sustain. Berserker for cleave if you're able to sustain. And then Absorb Magicka if you're just not able to sustain a full light attack rotation at all. Magplars do have a little bit high drain compared to regen. It's not quite as bad as DKs or Sorks, but it is still noticeable even on a Breton. So if you do need to run that Absorb Magicka enchant, definitely don't feel bad for doing so. Now, for other sets you might want to consider running in place of things like Siroria or Spell Strategist here, because Spell Strategist is fairly expensive to obtain here. The first set that I'm going to mention is going to be Burning Spellweave. So this is a light armor set that is dropped from City of Ash, either 1 or 2. Typically speaking, this will be used more as a front bar set, less as a body set, because it is a proc set, so having it on the front bar is not that big of a deal there. This is going to be probably the weakest out of all the classic options that you can choose from. Probably only going to be stronger than, I'd say, Julianos. So that it is an option. It is City of Ash is a very easy dungeon. City of Ash 1 in particular on normal, very easy to blow through to get body pieces and weapons. So this is just a very, very easy set to obtain, and it has pretty much been a staple across pretty much metas all the way back to Homestead and earlier. So I would still try to pick this up in case it does make a comeback. Beyond Burning Spellweave, I'm just trying to find them because I have a lot of sets here. Master Architect. So we are running Crescent Sweep on the front bar. Templars do have a cheap ultimate to make use of Master Architect. Crescent Sweep costs 72 ultimate, so you are able to run Master Architect on the front bar. You can also run it on as a body set as well, so you can run something like Master Architect on the body and Spell Strategist on the front bar if you would like. So really, it can fit in either option here. You probably want to avoid running Siroria and Master Architect at the same time, because then you're doubling down on Minor Slayer, which basically means you're wasting an armor slot. So I would recommend doing Master Architect and a non-Minor Slayer, so basically not Siroria. So you don't want to pair this with Siroria if you can. This is dropped from Halls of Fabrication, so you will need to have access to Varnafel in order to gain this set. So just bear that in mind. So you will need to have access to that expansion. Mother Sorrow is another pretty solid set to use. You Ideally want this on the body because of that. The 5-piece is a static bonus, it's not a proc set, so if you use it on the front bar, you will lose it while you're on your back bar. That being said, you can use it on the front bar if you would like in a pinch, but like I mentioned, it is going to be more consistent as a body set, and it does end up adding in a little bit more DPS than Burning Spellweave. Burning Spellweave and Mother Sorrow are pretty close together. Mother Sorrow is a light armor set that is dropped from this Zaan, so you're able to farm it or buy it off of guild traders. I believe that is pretty much it for potential set replacements there. So those are basically your set replacements, and again, I have them down in the description below for anybody who is interested. Now going over our character sheet here. So I am a Breton. The top Magicka races right now are Ultimer, are going to be at the top, but they don't have very good sustain. Dunmer are very, very close behind, but similarly to Ultimer, they don't have any sustain passives. Bretons are coming in the third, and that's just because they have a sustained passive that basically reduces the cost of all magic abilities by 7%. This is a very, very strong passive. I went over this in a few videos earlier, just explaining just how powerful this passive actually is. So like I mentioned earlier in this video, Templars do have a little bit high drain compared to regen. Again, not as bad as Sork or DK, but it's still very noticeable, so you might want to run Bretons instead. Just because if you have the heavy attack as an Ultimer, that might drop your DPS enough where Breton might end up pulling ahead or very, very close. Those are their three main Magicka DPS classes. You can also go with Khajiits if you would like. Khajiits do get 10% additional crit damage, which is always helpful on a Magicka DPS, and they do have a little bit of additional max Magicka, 825, but those other three races that I mentioned earlier will typically out-parse a Khajiit. For attributes, all points into Magicka. You can shift a couple of points into health if you would like, if you want to add some survivability. I would personally put no more than 10 points. At that point, you're kind of making too much of a trade-off between damage and survivability there. For our Mundus, we're going with the Thief. I mentioned earlier, you can also go with the Shadow as well, and I've already kind of did a video kind of showing you guys when to determine whether the Thief is going to be better than the Shadow, but general rule of thumb, the lower your crit chance is, the better the Thief is going to be. And the higher your crit chance is, the better the Shadow is going to be. So you can go with either one of them. The difference is going to be pretty small comparatively. Now I am using Parse Food, so this is Ice Cream. This basically replicates getting orbs. So the magic regen that you get is very, very close to what you would get as if you were getting orbs on cooldown. So that's why I'm using this here for the Parse. But for food, you would typically be running either Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Citrus Fillet. You can potentially run blue food as a Breton, though you are cutting it very, very close with sustain that way. So I'd probably just play it safe and run Witchmother's or Clockwork Citrus Fillet. I am a vampire. I should be a stage 2 vampire for that 10% additional Magicka regen, but vampirism is going to be helpful. You get that 10% additional Magicka regen at stage 2, and at stage 3 you do get some damage reduction through the Undeath passive as well. So you don't have to be a vampire if you don't want to. It's not that big of a deal, that 10% additional Magicka regen, but if you want to min-max, then you do want to be a vampire there. Now going over our skills, starting off with our front bar, we have Elemental Weapon, Radiant Oppression, Vampire's Bane. You can go with the other morph, which is Reflective Light. Vampire's Bane lasts for a longer period of time, but Reflective Light does give you additional bit of cleave, so it's kind of up to you which one you want to go for. We have Solar Barrage, Inner Light, and Crescent Sweep. For our back bar, we have Blazing Spear, Blockade of Fire. I have Elemental Drain for the purposes of the parse that we're going to be doing later, but this is normally where you would put your shield. So you can use Dampen Magic or Absorb Magicka, whichever one you prefer. Dampen Magic gives you a larger shield, but Harness Magic does give you some Magicka back if you are hit by spell damage. Channeled Focus, Rearming Trap. You can use Channel Acceleration instead if you're playing at range, because Rearming Trap does require you to be within melee range. And then Fiery Rage. Now for ultimates, you basically have options here. So you can go with Fiery Rage if you would like. It is a very strong ultimate. It has much better cleave compared to Crescent Sweep. But for single target DPS, Crescent Sweep is actually a very nice ultimate to use as well. So really you can go with either one. I personally like to use Fiery Rage for instances where I need to get a lot of cleave going. For single target stuff, or where I'm able, basically all the enemies are in front of me, I'll typically use Crescent Sweep instead. For the purposes of the parse, I will start off with a Fiery Rage, and then I'll start using Crescent Sweep afterwards. Of course, if you're using Master Architect, you're going to want to use Crescent Sweep. Now going over our champion points, the CP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so they froze the CP cap increase. So we're at 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of the 3 different constellation types. So starting off with our green CPs, 75 into Arcanist, and 75 into Tenacity. That gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes, really however you'd like. So I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. You can push Arcanist and Tenacity up to 100 and a 100 if you would like. That'll give you 70 points to put across the remaining nodes. Again, however you'd really like. It's up to you how you want to do that. Our blue CPs, I have 66 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 25 into Spell Erosion, 9 into Staff Expert, 66 into Master at Arms, and 40 into Thaumaturge. Now, you might want to get the Exploiter passive here. Magicka Templars do make pretty good use out of Exploiter because they have a fair amount of dots there. So if you want to go that route, then you're going to want to drop LA Expert down to 56. You're going to want to drop Elfborn down to 56. I want to drop Master at Arms down to 56 as well. Drop Staff Expert up to 3. Oh, nope. Drop it down to 2. That'll give you 75 in Thaumaturge to give you that Exploiter passive. That's an option if you would like to do so, but I prefer this particular CP setup. The difference in that setup is going to be pretty small overall, so it's kind of up to you if you want to use that or not. For our red CPs, this particular approach that I have here is a very balanced approach, so it's going to be good for all the trials, but it's not going to be maximizing your mitigation. So for every specific trial, there is going to be a optimal red CP setup in order to best maximize your damage mitigation. I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so now that is all done, all of our build information is done, let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So I'm going to be assuming you're playing at melee range, but this rotation remains true whether you are in melee or out here in range. That's just because Solar Barrage only deals damage within 8 meters. So if you're further than 8 meters away, you won't be able to do any damage to Solar Barrage. That being said, during that 8 second duration, you have infinite empower stacks. So every light attack you deal is basically empowered. You get 40% additional damage on your light attacks while you have Solar Barrage up. Now, in raids, Purifying Light is currently bugged, where if you do too much damage, if your group is doing too much DPS, the second hit of Purifying Light will actually not register. So in this instance, our Solar Barrage is actually going to be more useful than Purifying Light. Once Purifying Light, that bug is fixed, then Purifying Light will be better for ranged Magplar builds, but for right now, Solar Barrage is the way you want to go here. So the main things you want to maintain are obviously going to be Blockade and Blazing Spear. You want to maintain Blazing Spear because you do have a passive in the Aedric Spear line that deals additional damage. Burning Light, whenever you deal damage with an Aedric Spear ability, you have a 25% chance to deal an additional X amount of physical damage or X amount of magic damage, whichever one is higher. This effect can occur once every half a second, so make sure to keep Blazing Spear up because you still want to get those Burning Light procs going. The only time you will drop Blockade and Blazing Spear is going to be towards the end of Execute. There is an add-on for those of you guys who play on PC that will basically show you when you want to use Jesus Beam, but a general rule of thumb is starting at 33%, you're going to want to stop using Ellie Weapon, start using Jesus Beam. You still want to keep all your dots going. When you hit around 25% or so, that's when you want to drop all your dots except for Blockade and Spear and just use Blockade, Spear, Jesus Beam. And then around 10%, that's when you want to use Jesus Beam. Just Jesus Beam. You want to drop everything else. Obviously, like I mentioned, there are a few caveats here and there. It's not going to be exact cutoffs, but those are rough estimates. Those are the numbers that I typically use when I play on my Magplar. The other thing you want to try to maintain is going to be Rearming Trap for the Minor Force. It's okay if you let it drop off for a little bit. It's whatever. Channel Focus, you do want to maintain this. This gives you a major Resolve, a major ward, which increases your flammability, but it also gives you your Magicka, so it gives you 240 Magicka every second. You want to maintain this for your regen. But like I mentioned earlier in this video, Templars do have a little bit higher drain compared to regen. It's not as bad as Sorks or DKs, but you can definitely notice it if you compare it to, let's say, a Magicka Nightblade or even a Magicka Warden. And on our front bar here, try to maintain Solar Barrage as best you can. The Empower is a very, very powerful bonus here, and then I've already kind of mentioned when you want to use Jesus Beam compared to Elemental Weapon here. So here's a quick demonstration of the rotation. So I've kind of shifted gears more towards dynamic rotations nowadays. Dynamic rotations will give you more damage than a static rotation, even though static rotations are easier to kind of master, and that's just because dynamic rotations, the idea behind it is to maximize your dots. So you don't recast your dots early. versus static rotation where you might end up recasting your dots a little bit early, just based on kind of what your rotation looks like. So dynamic rotation, basically your dot's going to be a little bit offset, so you might do on your back bar to apply blockade, then swap to your front bar, do 2 casts of elemental weapon, then go to your back bar for shards, and so on and so forth. So I'll kind of show you guys what I mean by dynamic rotation right here. Obviously you want to start off with a Rearming trap. So starting off, all your dots are pretty much going to be pretty nicely in line starting off here. But starting around here, this is when your dots are going to be offset a little bit here. When you're going to start getting offset, and this is where you're going to start doing your dynamic rotation. You can see here that my dot timers are slightly offset now. And again, that's a result of the dynamic rotation here. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about dynamic rotation. You don't really have a set rotation. A fixed rotation, on the other hand, would look something more like this. Let me just get some Magicka back. Fixed rotation would basically be, or I should say static rotation, pretty much stays exactly the same. And this usually ends up with you either overcasting or undercasting some dots. You're not really maximizing, so to speak, your damage this way. So static rotation will give you a little bit more DPS, but it is a little bit harder to master, and it is obviously more easier to do if you have something like Strendar in order to kind of keep track of all of your dots going at the same time, or action duration reminder. Alright. Now that's all said and done, let's go ahead and do a 60-minute dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS you're able to pull. Now, I do want to mention here, I already mentioned this in the beginning of this video, but Magblades do have Minor Berserk built in. So if you want to compare this parse to a Magblade, you will need to take that in consideration. Magblades do have very good self-buffed parses because they do have access to Minor Berserk. Magicka Templars don't have access to that, so just bear that in mind if you want to compare Magicka Nightblades to Magicka Templar parses. Can compare this parse to the other 3 classes though. Go ahead and get started then. I highly recommend trying to make Blazing Spear the last ability on your back bar if you can, because of that animation. You don't want to be caught in that animation. And again, I am using Crescent Sweep as my ultimate now. I started off with that Destra ulti. The Crescent Sweep is going to be a little bit better if you're able to be within melee range for single target DPS. Make sure Solar Barrage completely runs out. You don't want to recast Solar Barrage early, otherwise you will be missing out on 1 tick of Solar Barrage. So at this point I would be starting to use Jesus Beam. I would not be using Elemental Weapon. Keep in mind that while you're using Jesus Beam, you will not be able to drink any potions. We're going to be using our ultimate here. At this point we're dropping all of our dots except for Blockade and Shards. Now at this point we are dropping all of our dots except for Jesus Beam. We're just going to be using straight Jesus Beam here. There we go, that is our Magicka Templar parse here. So Jesus Beam is a very powerful execute, not quite as strong as Killer's Blade, but still a pretty nice execute nonetheless here. So Radiant Impression here, Again, max ticks not quite as high as Killer's Blade, plus it is a channeled ability, so you are missing a few weaves just because you have to channel and you can't weave in the middle of a channel. So it's not quite as strong as Killer's Blade, which kind of what helps push Magicka Nightblades a little bit ahead of Magicka Templars, beyond the fact that Magicka Templars are also reliant on outside sources of Minor Berserk. So, as you can see here, light attacks are pretty strong, especially with the Empowered. So if they try to find Empowered here, you can find it actually. Full Barrage, 69%, so this is basically your uptime on Empowered, so pretty nice boost to our overall DPS. Our light attack DPS here is much higher compared to other classes that might not have access to a consistent sort of source of Empower. Bane Depression, like I mentioned, is a very, very strong execute ability. Even though we only use it during executes, it's our number 2 in terms of damage contributors here. So very strong here. Burning Light, this is the passive that I mentioned earlier that is tied with Blazing Spear. You can see here it does a decent amount of damage, almost as much damage as Zaan itself. You do want to try to maintain Blazing Spear as best you can for this Burning Light passive. It hits pretty hard too, so we're averaging about 10k. We got a max crit of 15.4. This can crit, so just bear that in mind here. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to compare this to a Magicka Nightblade, just bear in mind that Magicka Nightblades do have Minor Berserk built into their toolset. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.